out with this first question.
Okay.
All right. So earlier, in one of the earlier sessions, you had talked about admitting when you're wrong. Is it wrong to not tell your kid about sin in your past before becoming a Christian?
Great question. So no, I think that's totally different. When I talk about admitting sin, I was talking about your sin against them. It is not necessary for them to necessarily know all of your sin of your past. There are a couple of things that I would encourage you to consider in that regard. I recently counseled a guy who committed adultery, but he's got young children. They're like 2, 6, and 10 or something. And so I think it would be, if he's presenting himself as a Christian, been teaching his kids to church for all these years, and then he committed adultery, that is not in line with what he's taught. So I told him, I think you should tell your kids it's a matter of when, not if. A 2-year-old has no understanding, and so there's no point in telling a 2-year-old.
Right.
But the 10-year-old, I think, should know, or soon know, if not right now, but pretty soon, because you don't want those kids to find out from somebody else. And it was a public sin. He was kind of a part-time pastor at his church. It became public in the community, so lots of people knew. And so for them not to be told directly, I think is very unwise, because now it seems like you're lying. Even if you weren't, it seems like you're lying. And so in that situation, I think it's appropriate to tell your kids. But you don't owe your children every sin you've ever committed in the past. There's nothing in the Bible that I see that would warrant that. I've been hammering on the point of when you sin against them, it's vitally important that you confess to them, but you do not owe them every sin you've ever committed. No, I don't believe that.
Okay, that's good. So what's the balance between relating to your kids, so sympathizing with their weaknesses and being a parent? Is there a helpful way of sympathizing without going too far?
Yeah. So I think when you're sympathizing, you're really focusing on the disposition towards them. When you sympathize, there's not the hostility over their sin. There's not the edge to your tone of voice, and it's not an inquisition like you're a private investigator. The sympathy gives you a different disposition towards them. But Jesus never tolerated sin. And so it's not looking the other way and acting like they didn't sin or giving them a pass. It's just how you talk about sin and how you talk about those things. And that's not an accident that Jesus was a friend of sinners, and the sinners flocked to him, and the religious leaders hated him. And part of that was because he sympathized with people's weaknesses, and he didn't condemn them. He invited them to come to him. And so that's where I think the picture is. That's what we're trying to model, is Christ welcoming all sinners without excusing sin. Like even in the story in John chapter 8 with the woman caught in adultery, he says, "Where's everybody to condemn you?" They were supposed to cast the first stone, and they all left. And he says, "Neither do I condemn you." And then he says, "Go and sin no more." And so there's this compassion for their struggles without the condoning of sin. That's what we're trying to do. It's a disposition towards our kids in their struggles, but it's not saying sin is okay, because it isn't okay. That sin actually sent Jesus to the cross. It's not okay, but we can have a disposition that is gentle and kind and encouraging in the midst of that, and that would be how I try to balance that.
Yeah, that's good. So this is kind of a question, sort of a statement, but a request for you to expound on this. So it says, in this day and age of video games rule our children, help. What's your response to the video games are just something that dominates students quite often, their time, their thoughts, sometimes their money.
Yeah.
Is there something that biblically
Yeah.
you could encourage parents towards in thinking about that?
Yep. So the first thing I would just say real quickly, have compassion. So you're acknowledging a reality that's their world. And so I would want to be compassionate there. But I also would want to help them to consider 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12. 1 Corinthians 6:12 says, "All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be enslaved by anything." And so you would want to be able to help them evaluate, are they enslaved? And so I'm going to leave the video game thing for a second to talk about coffee. I have numerous young adult children who love coffee, and my daughter, who's 17 now, her dream job as a high schooler is to work at Starbucks. And she fought for, pursued, interviewed, and got the job, and she is now a Starbucks barista, and she loves it. So one of the things we've been talking about for years is when she's drinking, last couple of years when she's been drinking coffee, is listen, if you go a day or two without coffee, do you get a headache? That's a caffeine withdrawal. That means you're addicted to caffeine. Don't let that happen. And so in other words, we've been talking for years about taking a day off once a week or something like that to make sure that you don't get caffeine headaches. And so every once in a while I check in with her, how you doing with your with headaches? And fine. So we keep an eye on it, in other words, so it's not just something she's running off doing on her own. And so the same would be true with the video games, keeping an eye on them, talking about that, encouraging them to take a day off. If they're like miserable the day they have to take off, then that's an indication they're being mastered, and then you're going to need to start to apply some of the things we were talking about persuasion and conversations and influencing them. And if they can't be influenced, you may need to use your authority, but you don't start out with their authority if they're older. If they're 6 or 7, you just keep them limited, pretty limited, don't let them do it a lot. As they get older and it gets harder and harder to restrain them, so to speak, now you start to shift towards advising them and consulting with them and helping them consider and helping them not to be dominated by it. And if they can't handle that, then you might have to restrict them, but don't start out trying to restrict them and make it a battle. I would encourage you to seek to find compromise and middle ground that they can live with and you can live with. Even if it makes you a little uncomfortable, it's not ultimately you that's living this life. You need to allow them to be a little different than you, but at the same time, if it's really, really excessive, then you might need to put some restraint in there. And so that's how I would try to navigate that. There is no great answer. I don't have a perfect answer. There is no perfect answer. It's just navigate it, keep your relationship in check, keep talking about it, don't let them be dominated by it, and then there's lots of wiggle room inside of those, I think, guiding principles.
That's good. So how do you praise and build up your rebellious, troubled teen when he doesn't do anything that's praiseworthy?
Doesn't do anything that's praiseworthy.
Seems pretty definitive.
Okay. So first of all, my first pushback would be I doubt that the child is doing nothing that's praiseworthy. I doubt that. So let me just do a couple things.
Yeah.
Do they take a shower? Do they brush their teeth? Do they get dressed? Do they have some sentences that don't have cuss words in them? I mean, simple, basic things like that. Do they say, excuse me, if they bump into somebody? I mean, there's a bunch of little things. So I would look really. So I get the pain of that comment and that question. I don't want to minimize it.
Yeah.
And so obviously something's going on very wrong there. But I would look hard for some basic things that are being done, like I just gave a few examples. Look more, if they're doing all those wrong, keep looking, but keep working at that. And then the other thing would be people who are that defiant are almost always not happy people. I don't know anybody who's absolutely rebelliously defiant and happy. I don't know those people. I've never met those people. And so I would be talking about the joy of the Lord, and I'd be talking about a relationship with Christ, and I'd be talking about abiding with Christ. John 15:11 says, abiding with Christ leads to joy. And I would offer joy to them, but joy's not found in rebellion, because the way of the transgressor is hard, Proverbs 13:15. And I would, again, pick my spots. I wouldn't go on and over and over again, but periodically I would drop in this concept. Hey, I believe the Bible teaches us there's a path that's filled with joy. Psalm 16:11 would be a good reference. You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. That's the path God has for you. It's filled with joy. You don't look very happy to me. And if you want to talk about finding joy, I believe I have some answers for you. Just let me know when you want to talk about joy, because I'd love to help you. And then wait a little bit, and then if they're miserable for another week, go back and visit. Hey, you still don't look any more joyful than our conversation we had last week. I just want to remind you there's hope and there's help, and I would love to be the person to help you. Because remember, jamming down the Bible down his throat, trying to choke him on the Bible, making him listen to you speak Bible verses isn't going to persuade anybody. But to tell him, hey, I have answers, I have hope, I have help, and I can point you to someone who can bring you joy, I would want them to know that, and I would offer that to them, and I would keep trying to do it that way. And then obviously pray like crazy that God would bring them to their knees and bring them to a place of repentance, very much like the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15, that would be important to consider.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. All right, so how do you know when it's time for something more drastic? You've tested them, going to psychotherapy because they're not interested in anything, and then the text kind of cuts off. But I know you had talked a little bit about like there sometimes is a progression. There are more drastic things,
Yeah.
and in this they're talking about psychotherapy. So how do you think about what is the next step for parents? In those situations.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, when you're addressing your child directly with some of the principles, a lot of the principles we're talking about, and that is still not making progress, I would encourage you then to kind of the next layer would be to talk to somebody in your church, talk to a friend, talk to another family that your family loves and respects, and if they start to speak into that situation and that doesn't bring any help, then you might seek some more formal counseling at your church, like find a counselor at the church and move down that direction. If that doesn't work, then you can move to a place like 12 Stones where there's some counseling. Ours is temporary, so you come for 3 days. You get about 16 or 17 hours of counseling jammed into a 3-day period of time, and then you go home and live that out with an advocate so that somebody comes from home and helps you live it out when you get back home. That becomes a next step. If that still doesn't provide progress, then you may consider a residential place, that those places are 6 or 12 months. That would be kind of the progression I would go through. But I also would say, just because they're not changing, they're not following Christ, doesn't mean you need to keep advancing in all those things. Some kids can be they can be decent students, they could be holding down a job, they can be doing all those things, and they're not walking with the Lord, but that doesn't necessarily mean they need more counseling. They just might not be ready to follow the Lord yet. And so you keep on doing the normal parenting things we've talked about. So it just becomes when it's disruptive, significantly disruptive to your home, where it's becoming a negative influence on other children in the home, then you need to start moving towards more drastic measures, kind of in that progression that I talked through, I think I would go through. But just because they're not super excited followers of Christ at 16 doesn't mean they need all those things. It may just be persevering in normal parenting. But again, if you have these other things where there's rebellion or substance abuse or things like that that are more severe, sneaking out of the house, sleeping around, those kind of things that get pregnant, those are more extreme measures that need attention. And then I think the progression I talked about would be helpful.
Yeah, that's really good. All right, so you mentioned lamenting. Could you unpack that? Lamenting for adoptive parents as well as the adoptive kid.
Yeah, okay, great question. So again, I highly recommend, it's chapter 23 of the updated version of Paul Miller's book, The Praying Life. He uses a passage in Isaiah, I don't remember which one, but he uses a passage in Isaiah to guide you through writing your own lament. Okay, highly recommend it, encourage you to buy the book, and then use it. And here's how I would use it for an adoptive parent is if you're struggling, obviously if life is grand and your adoptive child is thriving, there's nothing to lament over, so you don't need to worry about it. But if your child is struggling, then you want to be lamenting of the struggles that you're going through as a parent. You know, so when we adopt a child, you know, the idea is we would love for them to be super excited and thrilled and embrace everything we're teaching them and love Jesus and follow Jesus, and it doesn't always work that way. And so there's a lamenting. That was our hope. That was our prayer. That was our desire. And if that's not happening, there's something to lament over. Also, there could be lamenting over the child's past and lamenting for them, crying out to God for the child. So you're praying on their behalf for their hurts and their pain and their suffering. And then on the child's side, again, the feeling of neglect, the feeling of being rejected, the feeling of being abandoned, those are things to be lamented over. And Jesus knows what that feels like. He was rejected. He was despised of men, Isaiah 53 says. So Jesus knows what it's like to feel rejected. He can sympathize. He can be that high priest who sympathizes. And so we want to invite our children to lament over the difficulties that they've experienced. And the idea, and this is what I think was really helpful about that book, it was really helpful for me because I don't naturally lament. That's not something I do. I'm a pretty upbeat, positive guy, and just keep persevering, and your life usually kind of figures itself out, and I keep moving forward. But the idea to slow down and to lament and not ignore the difficulties we face, but learn to connect with God with the difficulties we face. Because if all we do is connect with God when life is good, there's going to be long seasons of our life where we're not really connecting with God. We need to connect with God in the moments of celebration where we raise our fists and say, praise God, you're awesome. But we also need to connect with God when life is hard and circumstances are really crummy. And Jesus modeled that for us in the Garden of Gethsemane. He cries out to the Father, Father, take this cup from me. Take this cup away. I don't like this. I don't like my circumstances. Take it away. But not my will, but yours be done. That was a cry of lament by Jesus himself. And we need to encourage our kids and ourselves to have that same type of prayer life where we're honest with God, real emotions, real feelings, but also our will is always surrendered to the Father's, just like Jesus modeled for us.
That's awesome. Yeah. What are ways that I can fight bitterness against my child? It always feels like there's thing after thing, and I'm just growing weary.
Yeah. So a number of things. Number one, you need to get some help when you get weary like that. If you're a single parent, then you need to bring some people from the church in to help you. If you are married still, then you want your spouse to take turns. You should tag team and help each other bear those burdens. We all have days where we get worn out and exhausted. Your spouse is there to help you. If you don't have that spouse, like I said, because you're a single parent, that's the body of Christ should step in and help you in that situation. Don't be bashful. Don't be ashamed. Don't be embarrassed. The body of Christ is for you and for us, and they should step in and help you. Regarding the individual struggle, the internal struggle about bitterness, I would always encourage people on two fronts when you're dealing with bitterness. It's a very common counseling issue, honestly, so I deal with it all the time. And the way I think about that, the way I try to help people is there's really two steps, there's two things to do to fight against bitterness. One is to lament over the hardship, over the difficulty, to mourn, to grieve, to lament over the difficulty you're facing, but the other is to forgive. The other is to forgive. Now, the question becomes when I say forgive, what if they haven't asked for forgiveness? That's a great question. So if they've asked for forgiveness, you just need to model and practice Luke 17:3 and 4, where it says if somebody sins against you, even 7 times in the same day, and they come to you and say, I repent, you're commanded by God to forgive. But the more likely scenario in the question that's being asked is the child's not repenting, the child's not asking for forgiveness. Now what do I do? And I would encourage you in that situation, the principle is the same, but you do it a little differently. Mark 11:25 is a really helpful verse for this whole conversation. Mark 11:25 says, and when you stand praying, and there remember you have something against someone, forgive him as the Lord has forgiven you. So you get the idea. In Luke 17:3, there's a conversation. If the person comes to you and says, I repent, you forgive. That's normal forgiveness like we normally think about it. The other situation is you're all by yourself, seemingly like doing your devotions is kind of the picture I get. You're there by yourself, it's just you and God, and you remember that person who's hurting you, like your child who's rebelling against you. And God says, forgive. Now think about that. You're not talking to the child, so you don't go up to the child and say, hey, listen, I know you've been a crummy brat lately, and I'm really sick of your behavior, but I want you to know I forgive you. That's not what we're talking about here. It's you and God having a conversation. What is forgiveness? Forgiveness is a releasing of a debt. Yes. Canceling or releasing of a debt. Mm-hmm. So when I say in this prayer I'm having to God, and God says forgive, I'm talking to God, I'm not talking to the child. What does it mean to release the debt to God? That's what I would encourage you to consider. This child is sinning against me. I need to release this offense, this disrespect, this whatever it is. I need to release it to God. And Romans 12 then comes to mind, verses 17 to 21, where it says, do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. And then it talks about this idea of not avenging a person's sin, not avenging, leave room for the wrath of God. And then it says, if your enemy is thirsty, give him a cup of cold water. Give them a cup of cold water in Jesus' name. And then verse 21 ends with, do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. So that's a picture then of releasing the debt to God, but you're actively involved in, as you release the debt to God, say, God, you take care of this. This is your job to avenge. You do that. You do your job. I'll do my job, which is give a cup of cold water in Jesus' name. Don't be overcome with evil. I keep on loving that person, but I release the debt to God. God, you take care of this. I need your help. I need you to intervene. And then we actively pray in that particular situation that God would do something to help you while you're practicing that forgiveness and while you're practicing that lament. And then you do all the other things we were talking about, bring people around you to be praying, ask questions, bring them the gospel periodically, all those other things. But I think the mourning, the lamenting, and the forgiving in the sense of releasing the debt to God, that would be my answer to deal with the bitterness.
That's good. That's good. So, all right, you maybe this parent isn't in the habit or the practice of praying with their student. How can they practically do that? What would that practically look like, especially if you're not in the habit of doing it?
Yeah. So remember we talked about making goals that are simple and more attainable, and not like if I say, okay, no, you know what, that's really terrible, and you need to pray the next 365 days, you better pray with your child every single day to be a good parent. That would be very overwhelming, right? But I'd encourage you to start small. Would you commit to praying with your kids? Maybe, for example, I'm just going to give a couple samples. Would you pray for your kids once you get home from church every Sunday? Just everybody gather around and one of the parents talk about the sermon for like 10 seconds or 30 seconds, one little quick comment, one nugget of truth from the sermon, and let's pray that we so say for example it's on kind speech. And so Ephesians 4:29, I've quoted it a number of times. We'll just say a quick word around we all gather in the foyer or around the kitchen table before we eat lunch or whatever. Hey, let me just pray real quick that we would be a family whose speech is edifying to one another. Can I pray for us real quick? Let's just pray. And you say a quick 30-second prayer about our speech being edifying as a family. Amen. And then you go back to do your normal stuff. Maybe it's at bedtime. Maybe if you have one or two kids, if a couple kids, and they're around similar ages, you could just gather the two of them at bedtime and just pray real quick at bedtime. Or maybe before you go to school, you send them off to school, you just pray real quick. Hey, let me pray for you before you go out today. Or maybe they've talked to you last night about some of their tests that they're nervous about or they're afraid of. Or maybe there's a bully at school they're really having a hard time with. Can I pray for you about that bully you were talking to me about last night before you go to school? Just little opportunities like that to look to incorporate prayer. And you don't need to do it all the time, but just let them know, hey, I'm praying for you, and then pray for them from time to time. And if you'll do that, I think you can start to incorporate prayer more and more into your life.
That's right.
And then obviously, if you don't do it, remember I challenged you earlier about dinners. You need to have dinner together. And as much as possible, again, I know everybody's schedule is not perfectly cooperative, but you need to fight for that and praying for dinner, praying at dinner for your family. And don't just pray, thank you for the food. Pray for your kids. Pray for somebody. And if there's something going on, talk about that in your prayer at dinner. So the dinner's delayed 30 seconds because you prayed about something meaningful. Incorporate real things into your prayer life, even at the dinner table. So dinner table, bedtime, off to school, after church, those would be some simple ways to pick some of those and pray once in a while. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. And then the more you do it, the more the kids will expect it, and then it becomes less and less of a deal.
That's really good. It's like a muscle. You just got to work that out.
Yeah.
Okay. How much should we put up with in terms of foul language during rants or destruction of home property?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I wouldn't put up with that. So a couple things. So if children are under 12, foul language and rants falls under the category of foolish behavior from Proverbs 14:29. So I would be spanking a child who's doing that who's under 12 and under. So that's how I would deal with it. If they're older, then we're going to be talking about consequences that might be necessary. If they're breaking things, for example, they're going to have to pay that back. So they're going to have to work, and the money's going to have to pay back whatever they broke, and those types of things. The other thing would be practicing all the things we talked about conversations and what are the wise wants, and is there a wise want in there? There often is, not always, but there often is, and so I'd be finding those wise wants, having gospel conversations, asking questions. One of the things that often happens when kids are angry is they don't feel like anybody cares. It's not always true, and I'm not saying that's true in this situation. I'm just saying that we want to eliminate some things. Eliminating some things means making sure that they know you care, making sure that you're asking questions, making sure you're addressing any concerns that they have, but not, I would not, in a sense, tolerate it. You would want to be addressing it. You want to be talking about it. Honestly, if it's significant damage, there might even be the police called, and they might get arrested, and that's perfect. I mean, if they've done something severe like that, that's certainly possible. I would not rule that out. Romans 13 talks about the governing authorities are in place to restrain evildoers. And so if this child is intimidating, especially a mom, is intimidating a mom and violent toward a mom, I absolutely would call the police on a child like that who's older. And I think those would be some things that I would try to do, but definitely not tolerating it. Also, probably another thing I would add in is to get some other men of the church to address this child's behavior, to let them know if this happens, that somebody's coming to the house, if it's severe enough. Have a group of men in the church who know if this teenage boy starts acting up like this, there's going to be men coming to the house to stop him from doing those kind of things. And usually when there's an audience and accountability and it's not being tolerated, I think that there could be a lot of progress made in a situation like that. But you would want to get some advisement as well, probably get some pastors involved of getting a team together, because that's pretty severe behavior. And so definitely don't ignore it. Definitely don't keep it silent. Definitely don't keep it alone in your family. Get help. But these are some things you can do to address it. But definitely don't just leave it alone.
Yeah, that's really good. Can you discuss setting a consequence system that is appropriate for teens?
Okay, so by the nature of the question, if I could be gentle, I don't like it. I wouldn't have a system, okay? Each individual situation should be different, and again, your consequences ideally are minimal. So I'll be honest with you, other than spanking my children when they're young, I almost never, I'm choosing my words very carefully, listen carefully, I almost never consequence my children. I didn't say never, but almost never. Because when they're young, I'm going to be very adamant, you listen to me when I speak, you obey the first time, and if you don't obey the first time, I'm going to spank you, and you're going to learn to obey me the first time. Usually by the time they're 8, 9, they're obedient. My children are, when I tell them to do something, they do it. We don't have any battles about, are you going to do your chore? Of course you're going to do your chore. That's not even up for debate. Now, they're not perfect children, and they don't do everything exactly like I ask and all that stuff. They're growing and imperfect like everybody else's children. But the battle for obedience has been won already before they're older. And so what I want to be able to do is, then as they get older, now I'm working on character issues. And so, for example, if they're busy with schoolwork and they don't get around to doing something I asked them to do, like they were supposed to clean the bathroom, for example, and they forgot, okay? So we're going to have a conversation about that. Hey, listen, you forgot to clean the bathroom like I asked you, right? It wasn't like I said, clean the bathroom. They said, no. That's different, right? But they forgot, they got busy, they got distracted, they didn't do it. We all know what that's like. And when they're 15, 16, 17, and lots of schoolwork, and one of my children, for example, is taking dual credit college classes while in high school. And so that happens. That's not a fake story. That's real. That does happen. So I want to have a conversation. Hey, listen, we talked to you about cleaning the bathroom. That didn't happen. When are you going to get that done? When can you get that done? Dad, I'm looking at my calendar. I'm so sorry I didn't get it done, but I can get it done tomorrow morning before lunch. Fantastic. You take care of that. That's the end of the conversation. Nothing else to talk about. Now I'll go visit, and the next morning I might say, hey, Brent, did you forget about the chore you're supposed to do? And she might say, no, I got it, Dad. Great. So I'm going to follow through on all that. But if that's taken care of, if I can influence her and persuade her and help her in a particular situation, that's far better than issuing consequences. So I want to avoid consequences when I can. Now, if a child persists and refuses, then eventually there's going to be consequences. And I would make it very specific to the situation and very short. So, for example, if it's chore-related, they're going to get some extra chores to do. If it's late, if they're tardy, for example, then they might have to come home early. If they don't wake up in the morning, they might have to go to bed earlier, have an earlier bedtime. But it's short, specific, focused consequences that only deal with the particular issue. See, that's why things like taking car keys away when they were disrespectful makes no sense to me. Those are totally unrelated things. And so the kids don't make the connection either. And so they're just irritated with you because you took stuff away. And so it needs to be directly connected to the issue and directly connected to the behavior, and then it's a short consequence to get their attention, and then you keep working with that, and then having gospel conversations to continue to reinforce what you're talking about. Proverbs 29:15, excuse me. Proverbs 29:15 says, "The rod and reproof imparts wisdom." The rod and reproof. Now, in context, he's talking about spanking. So spanking your children and talking to them, that gives them wisdom. As they get older, it doesn't change. Discipline and conversations imparts wisdom. Not one or the other, it's both and. And so we want to use them, but we use them sparingly. And I say things like this to my children: I don't want to not let you go see your friends this weekend, but you need to make sure you're home on time. So this happened recently in my house. One of my daughters was newly driving, and she was late, like 15, 20 minutes, like repeatedly. And I said, "Honey, we're not real strict on this curfew thing, but come on, you're like never on time. This is not okay. If you are 1 minute late tonight, you're not going to be able to go out for a little bit. Now, please don't make me do that. I don't want to ground you. I have no interest in having you stay home. I want you to be able to see your friends. Please don't make me do that. But if you're late, I'm going to do it. I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of disciplining you. But please don't make me do it." So those are the kind of conversations I would have. Rather than having a system of consequences, I'm going to appeal to them: don't make me consequence you, but I'm not afraid to. That would be how I would approach it.
That's good. All right, so can you discuss guidelines specifically around electronics, media, smartphones, device access, monitoring, that whole conversation?
Yeah. So first of all, I am not an expert. I am very technologically challenged. My children know way more than I do, as is often the case. So I would just say a few things. When our children were younger, so we're honestly more lax than we used to be, so that's probably not the greatest thing. So a little conviction right now as you ask the question. But when our kids were young, the Game Boys were a thing. And so we used to have Game Boy days. So our kids were allowed to play Game Boy on, I think the days were Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, maybe Saturday and Sunday, I can't remember. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, something like that. And they had 30 minutes. They could play 30 minutes of Game Boy 4 days a week, 3-4 days a week, and then they had to put it away. Everybody knew when Game Boy Day was, and everybody knew to play, and then they put it away. That was easier back then, to be honest. It's much easier. Now they have phones and iPods. Now, first of all, our kids don't get phones until they get a driver's license. No phone till you have a driver's license. Okay, no phone, period. So they do have, though, iPods, some of them. So the older kids, they beg for an iPod. They usually get one before they drive, and then they pass the iPod down to the next one. So they get passed down. So the iPods have music and have some games. So they have stuff to do. But no phones till driver's license. That's how we do it. Because they have to pay for it, and they need a job to do that. So it all fits together, okay? Anyway, so no phones till driver's license. But these kind of things. So we would just... So now, again, I think we're probably a little too lax, to be honest, but there's things like, I do things like this. I'll see my girls, they'll wake up, the younger girls, and they're playing little games on iPods, and I'll tell them, you need to have breakfast first, put that down, or you need to do your schoolwork first. And how many TV shows have you watched today? And so our kids like, well, we usually buy seasons of shows we like, and they just watch them without the commercials. So we have the seasons of various shows. And so they can watch a show or two, and then they need to turn off the TV. And so there's just little loose kind of things so it doesn't dominate. Back onto the 1 Corinthians 6:12. Don't be mastered by anything. We really encourage our older kids, and don't bring phones to the table so we have dinner. That's not always great, but we're still working at that. But trying to minimize those types of things. And then there's also things like accountability software. There's Accountable to You. That's a good program to help with if you've got young men in your home who might struggle with looking at things they shouldn't be looking at. So Accountable to You is a wonderful device, app, that's the word I'm looking for. It's an app you can download and put it on devices, and that becomes helpful. And that becomes a way where you can be a partner with your child. So one of my boys was just seeking help in this particular way, and so we have good conversations, and he's seeking after accountability. He's seeking after help. He's sharing with me his struggle. It's not a secret. It's not hiding. It's a conversation. I'm trying to help him, and he's growing in this particular way. he actually he tells me what to do to protect him on his phone because I don't know how to do all these things. And so it's very much a collaborative effort to help him to guard his own heart against inappropriate things. And so I don't think anybody has a great solution, honestly, but I think it's these types of things where it's influencing, it's encouraging, it's helping them, it's having open conversations, it's helping them to see it's for their good that you're doing these things. You're not just trying to be a stick in the mud and take away their fun. And so you need to communicate those kind of things and help them so it becomes a team effort to help us not waste our time, waste our lives. Psalm 90 verse 12 says, teach us to number our days aright that we may gain a heart of wisdom. And so we want to just be mindful of that and helping our kids how they use their time. And so I don't think there's a great answer because it's everywhere, but I think these are some things we can do so that our kids aren't mastered by electronics.
Right, that's good. And I think even just to play off of a little bit of what you said, because it's not an easy, quick thing to answer, but I have a lot of conversations about this too, and just the thing I was really drawing from what you were saying is it's less about making sure that they don't look at certain things or don't communicate with certain people. It's more about the relationship, and like this whole thing has been about going after their heart. Yes. That's the most important thing, not necessarily just this. Yeah. What the fruit of what they're doing is.
Yeah. So trying to make a rule to restrain all that, I just don't think there's such a rule that exists. I think you could try for 100 years and they'll find a way around the rule. So don't make a rule. Right. But just try to work with them and help them and guide them and influence them. Again, back to influence. Influence is huge. If you set up an adversarial posture where you're going to demand that they do a certain thing a certain way, they will fight you, guaranteed, no question. Mm-hmm. But if you're on the same team trying to help them use their time for the glory of God and help them to have joy, because when you look at Facebook all the time and everybody smiles and everybody's happy and you become discontent, you want to talk to them about discontent from social media, and you can have a conversation about it rather than issue a bunch of edicts to tell them they can't do this, they can't do this, they can't do that.
Yeah, that's really good. All right, so, you've talked about a lot of different biblical principles. Is there anything, would you emphasize anything specifically for a child who has experienced trauma?
A number of things. So first of all, if they've experienced trauma, I think it's really good to get help. Don't suffer or try to deal with it alone. Yeah. So getting some counseling from people who have experience working with trauma, because it's different. We didn't really address any of that kind of thing, so just the normal biblical principles are helpful, but you're going to want additional things to deal with, okay? So trauma, often most victims of trauma, whatever form it is, blame themselves. And so you want to help them to really think about. So this is what often happens with trauma. So this is the person who was victimized, this is the victim. The person who did the perpetrating, and then this is the person who received the trauma, the victim. And so what ends up happening is this person perpetrates against this person, and it gets an ugly, tangled mess. And then this person gets taken out of their life, and they can't do the trauma anymore, potentially, and this person is left suffering, and then they begin to make sinful choices, partly instigated by the abuse that they received. And so what we want to be able to do is help them to not take ownership for what was done to them, because it wasn't their fault that they were mistreated. But they do need to take responsibility for their sinful responses. So, for example, a child who's sexually abused often becomes sexually active before marriage. That's very, 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 very common. So that they were abused is 0% their fault, 100% fault of the victim. But that they are sexually active now, that is 100% their doing. That they need to take responsibility and repent of the sexual activity that they're now partaking in. But we don't do that in a condemning kind of way, just like Jesus did in John chapter 8 that I referenced earlier. We do that in a very compassionate, loving kind of way, where we want to help them to see what are they longing for, what are the desires of their heart. Often it's to be loved, or to affirmation, or those kinds, to be valued, not treated like trash, those kind of things. And we want to help them to find Jesus Christ to be the answer to their thirsty soul, and for Jesus Christ to be the one who gives them their sense of identity. Their identity is not that they're a victim. Their identity is they're a child of God. A child of God who's been mistreated, who's been sinned against, but a child of God nonetheless is their identity, not what happened to them. And so helping them really anchor their identity in Christ is critical for somebody who's been abused and mistreated, and helping them to really meditate on who they are in Christ. And then also often victims like this often have triggers. They get triggered and they have memories and they have flashbacks. And we want to help them with those flashbacks. When they have those flashbacks, they need to be able to think about, like they might think, for example, a flashback would, I just feel like a piece of trash. Well, is that what God says about you? No, actually. He says you are precious, honored, and loved, Isaiah 43:4. He says you're royalty, 1 Peter 2:9. And we want to reinforce and teach them these kinds of truths so that when they feel like trash, we've got the Word of God for them to meditate on, to fight the lies that the enemy is trying to get them to believe about themselves. And so that becomes a journey of retraining their thinking and helping them. And so oftentimes counseling can be very, very, very helpful in identifying some of these triggers and some of these responses and how to replace them with biblical thinking and thinking rightly about who they are. And owning what they need to own and not owning, this is key, not owning what they shouldn't own, and helping them to distinguish those two things.
That's really good. Would you talk a little bit just to distinguish, so you talked about like we can't control our kids, and that's not even our job. Can you just talk about the nuances between not controlling your kids but actually still having the different rules like curfews and just house rules, whatever you have?
Yeah, so I mentioned a curfew, for example. Yeah. So I can't control my daughter's response that evening. However, I'm going to persuade her that this is for her good, this curfew. And then if she refuses to listen to my persuasion, then I'm going to use my authority. So if you think about that's really the picture. We're always starting out, as the kids get older, we're starting out with persuasion. And if they won't listen to persuasion, we use our authority. When they're little, we just use our authority. When they're 2, it doesn't matter what they think about their nap. I'm just picking them up. I'm taking them to their crib, and I'm dropping them in the crib, and I'm leaving. And it doesn't matter if they throw a fit. They can throw a fit, scream, holler, do all kinds of stuff. I'm walking out the door. I close the door. Eventually, they fall asleep. I just overpowered them because I'm bigger. That works great when they're 2. That's terrible parenting when they're 14. And so we just want to be able to help them to see this. We're trying to influence them when they're older, and if they refuse my influence, then they're leaving me with I have to use authority, and then I'm going to come with consequences that make their life difficult, and I don't want to do that. So I'm, again, persuading them, hey, listen, I don't want to have to consequence you. Don't do that. And so there are things I will not tolerate. Like, for example, we talked earlier about the breaking of things and all the violence in the home. That's not going to be tolerated, but I'm not going to try to control them. I'm going to respond to what they're doing, and I'm going to respond in a way that's good for my family, whatever that means. And you're just going to have to deal with the consequences of that, but it's not a battle to fight over control. If you do that, I'm going to do this. Here's an example, again, another example. So you may not even agree with this, but we had one of our children in college wanted to change his major and I don't want to bore you with all the details of why we had a problem with it, but my wife and I had a problem with it. We're partially paying for his school. Can I control a child in college? The answer is no. But do I have control of the money that I give to that? Absolutely. So I did not try to control my child. I simply told him, listen, if you change your major to that, we can no longer fund our contribution because I can't in good conscience give my money to that. So I'm not controlling you, but I'm not going to violate my conscience when you do something that I don't approve of with my money. I'm not going to do that. And so I'm not controlling. And he didn't change his major because of that, because he really couldn't afford to stay in college if we did that unless take out loans, and he didn't want to take out loans. And so he acquiesced and stayed with the major we preferred in that sense. But he chose his college. He chose his original major. And then he did change to a different major that was fine with us. But there was this conversation back and forth. He can absolutely do what he wants, but I can do what I want in response. And so you have a choice, my son. I love you either way. I'm not going to love you any less. But if you do this, I'm going to do this. And if you do this, I'm going to do this. And so it becomes an explanation of my responses. And he didn't like it, honestly. But that's okay. because I felt like I talked to him about, I have a conscience too. You're doing what you think is right, but I have to do what I think is right, and I don't support that. I can't. I won't do that. And so therefore, I believe we've made the right choice. You can disagree with me, and you can do it differently when you're a parent someday. That is totally your prerogative. But if you do this, I'm doing this, and if you do this, I'm going to do this. And now you can decide what you want. And again, I didn't control him, but I set up the parameters that I was comfortable with as a parent. So that's how I stay in a sense, in authority and for my contributions, but I'm not controlling him.
Right. That's good. Will you speak on just restricting the type of people that they spend with, specifically bad influences? Is that considered controlling? How do you think about that?
Yeah, great question. So once again, same principles. I'll kind of repeat myself in a way. So first of all, 1 Corinthians 15:33, I believe, says, bad company corrupts good morals. So there's no question, and Proverbs 1 that we read earlier, no question people can influence our kids in negative and bad ways. Okay? So what we want to do in those situations, though, is again, I would start out by trying to persuade rather than mandate. If I can't persuade and it becomes dangerous, well, then I'm going to mandate. But I don't start there. So, for example, one of my daughters started to spend time with a young man in youth group, and they didn't see each other outside of youth group, but they started to spend time in youth group, and he was not a good influence. And we started talking to her about this young man and how he was not a good influence for her. And she resisted for months. And we kept talking to her, picked our spots, encouraged her to reconsider, asked her to check her joy factor. How much joy do you have in your life? She was miserable. She was very unhappy. And so I didn't have to persuade her she was unhappy. It was very obvious. And so I just pointed that out. Hey, you used to be really joyful for your whole life. And all of a sudden, just a few months ago, you lost all of your joy. I want you to see the correlation. There's a joy correlation between this young man entering your life and your loss of joy. I just want you to see that. And we kept talking, and we kept talking, and we kept persuading. And eventually, 3-4 months later, she came to the conclusion we were right. And she ended the relationship. It wasn't really a dating relationship, but she ended that and separated herself from this young man and doesn't have anything to do with him anymore in that regard. I could have, on day one, said, this boy is bad for you. You may not speak to him. Give me your phone. I'm going to block his number. I could have done all kinds of things. And she would have hidden whatever she wanted to hide and probably gotten away with it for a lot longer than a couple months. And I would have not known. But instead, we were open and honest and didn't try to restrict her. But instead, we persuaded. We kept talking with her. We kept appealing to her. And eventually, she agreed with us and did exactly what we were hoping she would have done. It was 3 months later than we wanted, but I'll take 3 months later than never. And so that would be how we would kind of approach that.
That's interesting. I feel like a lot of this, like, controlling, do you control this? Do you control this? Something I think I'm hearing from you is something you really value is your child actually talking with you, being open with you, and that's a higher value.
Yes.
And so if you were doing things that kind of diminish
down.
that, like put a damper on that, then you need to almost rethink what you're doing.
Yes, correct. That's exactly right. You're right on track with what I'm thinking. The only exception would be, for example, if they were spending time with somebody who was shooting like up heroin or something, who they could die.
Sure.
That's a totally different matter. This was just an unhealthy relation. I don't want to say just an unhealthy relationship, but she was not in danger.
Yeah.
She was not being mistreated sexually. She was not being anything. It was just uncomfortable. It was teenage stuff. It was unhealthy. It was bad, but it wasn't shooting up drugs where you can die tomorrow. That's totally different. Then you clamp down really fast and you don't let that happen as best you can and explain all the things we talk about relationally. Honey, I love you and I'm really afraid for your safety. This is very dangerous. This is not okay. I mean, one mistake and you could die. This is not the same as just a boy who has bad language.
Right.
That's not good, and I would want them not to be around that person, but I'm not going to clamp down on bad language like heroin abuse. Those are totally different stratospheres of problems.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to blur those together because they're very, very different. One is just some emotional pain and difficulty that they're going to benefit in the long run from learning through that process. The other one is we can't make a mistake here because they could be dead. That's very different. A drunk driver, for example, that's another example. So if you got a friend who gets drunk and drives, and they're hanging out with that child, with that person at night, on Friday night, and they could get in the car with a drunk driver, well, no, that's too far. That's dangerous. That's life-threatening.
Yes.
But again, just emotional stuff, or they too much video time, or they play too many games or something, that's a totally different matter.
That makes sense. All right, we have time for just a couple more. Let's see, how would you handle teaching your kids to honor and obey their mother and father with divorced parents, specifically when one parent is not a believer and contradicts the other?
Yeah. So I would really encourage Christian parents not to criticize and berate and look down on the other parent. That's just not a good example. That's not helping children honor their parents. Okay, but I think it's also fair to speak so that's Ephesians 6, 2 and 3, honor your parents, honor your father and mother. But it's also fair to speak the truth in love, Ephesians 4:15. So to say, for example, say if the father's Christian, the mother's not, your mother doesn't take you to church, and that's very concerning. So obviously when you're at her house, you're not going to go to church. But here at our house, but as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord, Joshua 24:15. And so we're going to do things differently here. So we can have those honest, frank conversations about the differences, but we don't have to say your mother's a terrible person, your mother is horrible, I can't believe what a lousy person she is. Those kind of derogatory comments are absolutely out for the Christian. We should never talk like that about any human being, especially not the mother of a child that you married at one point. And so it's staying away from the derogatory, the criticisms like that, but it's perfectly appropriate to speak the truth in love about factual things that are impacting the child and how the child should handle certain things. You know, maybe if the mom has a boyfriend who speaks really terrible language, you know, you want to, hey, if you're able to get away from him and just go in the bedroom when he comes over and those kind of things, that would be something I think would be wise for you. We don't call him a bad name. We don't talk bad about him, whatever. You respect your mother. However, if you can do this and that and the other to deal with some of the things you're facing in that other home, I would encourage you to do that. Those kind of things are appropriate, but we're not derogatorily speaking about an ex-spouse or the parent of a child.
Right, yeah. And even that other parent is still an authority figure to
Absolutely.
that, to
Yep.
build that
Because
up.
if you undercut that other parent so
Yeah.
much, you're actually helping your child disobey.
Yeah.
And if they're disobeying that other parent, what are they doing? They're disobeying God. That's
Yeah.
very dangerous, and we don't want to do that.
Yeah, that's good. Let's see. How to best respond to a teen in the moment when they're expressing emotional outbursts like crying, yelling, etc.
Yeah, great. So this is probably one thing that I learned in my secular jobs that was actually helpful. One of like maybe two. I probably learned two things in all those years. Anyway, one of those was when kids are really escalating and loud, for you to talk calmly and quietly to them is really helpful. Hey, honey, I know you're upset right now. I'm so sorry. This is so hard. I hear, honey, settle down. You're going to be okay. We can work through this. Let's sit down. Why don't we sit down and talk about this? You know, just a calm demeanor. Don't talk loud. Don't go up to their level, but you just keep talking in a calm manner and stay present. So you're staying present and you're staying calm, and staying present and staying calm, meaning, and keep talking to them, but pick your spots, silence for a little bit, and then talk, you know, a few seconds or 30 seconds or something, but then revisiting the calm, hey, it's going to be okay. Come on, help me understand. What are you so upset about? And if you can ask questions and get them to start talking to you, that's going to calm them already, because they've got to string together sentences. And when they have to string together sentences, they're going to have to calm down and think and actually articulate themselves versus just ranting with little phrases and things. So just calm, present, and reassuring, and then help them and let them know you're there for them, you love them, you want to help them. Those kind of things would be the things that I would try to do. And obviously don't let them harm anybody else or themselves as best you can.
Yeah.
Those would be some of the things that I would try to do.
Yeah, that's good. All right, last question. How do you not crush their spirit in the situation of they, along with a friend, have planned this long trip without parents? It's well thought out. The text kind of cuts out there. But they planned this trip. It's well thought out, but it's without parents. And it sounds like this parent is not for that.
Yeah. So great question. So I'll just fill in some details maybe, and if somebody wants to speak up, I'm happy to hear your clarifications if you want. But I would, if that's, for example, a guy going off with a girl with no parents, or if there's like 3 guys and 3 girls all going with no parents, that's not a good option. Now, depends on how old they are.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yep.
So I would say, you can decide if you agree with me, because there's no Bible verse to guide this, but just wisdom issues, trying to think of wisdom. If they're in high school, absolutely not a chance in the world.
Right.
The answer is no. I'll be gentle, I'll be nice, but I'm unflinching, no. Because, and I would explain, what are my reasons? Don't just say no, but explain. This is not a good idea, my son, my daughter. This is not a good idea, and here's the reasons. This and this and this. Things like, there's no parental authority. There's nobody there. I do not know these children all that well. I don't know how they're going to respond without parental authority. I don't think this is wise because you got mixed company. When you have boys and girls together, oftentimes some things can get sexual. And I'm just being honest with you. Let's not pretend people don't have hormones. That's a lie. And so let's be wise. Don't put yourself in a situation where you could be in a really compromised situation. So no, the answer is no. Now, if they're in college, to be honest with you, I'm not going to say no, because they can do all those things in college. Mm-hmm. And so in college, I'm going to try to help them think, because, see, in college, they're going to do that apart from me and have no input from me, and I'll never know. And so if I hear about this kind of situation, I'm going to reason with them and persuade them and help them to think. And how do you protect yourself? And if you do show up to this event, I think it sounds a little unsafe and unwise, to be honest with you. However, if you do go and you see this, I would encourage you, you need to make sure when you go, you have an exit plan. You know how to get out of there. You've got somebody waiting at the phone who's going to come pick you up, or you have a key to the car and you can drive out of there. Have an exit strategy. Because, for example, if something criminal happens in the house and the police show up, you're just as guilty as anybody else. And so you need to know these kind of things in reality. And so I'm going to help them think about the situation and help them prepare themselves to deal with the situation if they're in college, because they can already do those things anyway. And if they're in high school, the answer is no, and explaining why.
Sure, that's good. All right, well, I think that's all the time we have for questions. Is there any last things you wanted to say before I wrap us up?
Probably a few things would come to mind. Number one, I think just to be, as you hear me talking, I've got all these, the scriptures are powerful. There's no substitute for the scriptures. So I hope my opinions were hopefully pretty minimal, and what the Word of God has to say was hopefully a lot, and I would hope we parent that way. So we have to be students of God's Word. I think that's really, really important. I also think, like we just emphasized at the end, establishing authority when they're young so you can influence when they're old. That's what we're after. That's really what we're after. If you love Jesus, we want to make sure our words have weight. So that's why spanking is important when they're little. But then as they get older, we want to get away from consequences as fast as we can so that we can really, really influence them. And that takes relationship. And so our kids ought to know that we love them. They ought to know that we want to talk with them. I can't stress enough how proud I am of the kids, my older kids right now. We actually talk about their sin struggles. They don't hide them from us. I don't know if all of them, they talk about all their sin struggles, but there are lots of conversations we're having with our older kids about their struggles. And they're open and honest about it. And it's great. It's wonderful, because I didn't have access to that. I didn't have access to Christian parents. My parents are wonderful, loving people, but they're not Christian parents who didn't raise me according to the scriptures. But they were really supportive. But I didn't have anybody to deal with my sin struggles that could help me in these ways. And so my kids come to us. They come to my wife and I, and they talk about their struggles and their emotions, and it's a wonderful thing. So relationship is critical to influence, and that's what we're after, is influence, not control. And so if we can keep that in mind as we deal with our kids, God can do great things. I really believe that.
Thank you. That's awesome. Well, let me pray for us so I can let you guys go. Scott, thank you so much. Again, yes, clap. You've been such a blessing, I know, to the people here, to the people that are watching this, and just how much, you were saying, I hope you hear God's word. You were saying a lot of scripture, so that was so helpful and so refreshing, so thank you.
Amen.
Let me pray. Father God, I want to thank you for today again. Thank you for answering my earlier prayer and just using this time to help us, to equip, to encourage, and to challenge. And I want to ask, Lord, that you would use the things that Scott has said, but specifically give us just an absolute love and desire for your word. That is the thing that just permeates our speech, our thoughts, the thing that is continually renewing our minds. We need your word in us. And Father, I just want to ask that you would bless these parents. Would you keep them? Would you make your face shine on them? Would you give them peace? Would you give their households peace? And would you grow their students to love you with every single part of their heart and their mind and their strength? Lord, we love you, and we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.